I guess fundamentally Urban Village started in 2008. My partner Scott Semerad and I were introduced by actually a commercial real estate broker. I knew a little bit about apartments, and Scott knew a little bit about raising money, and we started looking around the Midtown Crossing project, which was coming out of the ground at that time, and we decided that we would go and start testing the market within a 6-block radius of Midtown Crossing. We specifically set 31st Street as our eastern boundary because we were afraid of Park Avenue. We didn't see it likely that the project would actually ever get done, so we wanted to stay away from it. There were just some disgusting units and situations where people just shouldn't be living, and they had been. Some of those buildings on the corners, there had been homeless people living in them, so they had used some of the banisters for firewood to keep warm. There had been some units that were burnt out. There's some units that are just pretty run down. I don't think there are any place that I would have wanted to live, or most people would really choose to live. I think, at some level, perhaps out of desperation, you may have chosen to live there. In our view, they were beyond their useful life. I mean, they were 100 years old, and they'd been used hard, probably, especially the last 20 years. I personally think the biggest challenge for these older type of neighborhoods is, do you restore these existing buildings, or do you just knock them down? Early in 2011, the city actually, the director of planning contacted us and asked us to come in and said that they would like us to, redo that Park Avenue project from St. Mary's to Mason Street. And we said, we would have an interest in it, but, fundamentally we didn't think it was for sale. The city did say they would go take some action and, really probably turn up, I think in fact they turned up the pressure on the owners, and they told us that, they were going to start arresting people for code violations and arresting people for not developing it. And they were very blunt with us. They said, if you buy this, we will arrest you too. It was 4 city blocks. We used a baseline as to how many units were the buildings originally built at. That is what we would take them back to. So if they were originally built as a 24-plex, we would go remodel them into a 24-plex because, in fact, those units had been so chopped up and hodgepodge that there were probably, quote, 2 or 250 units. But in fact, we took it back to what we would call the original 136 units. I personally have a difficulty conceptualizing what things should look like before we kind of tear down some walls and open some things up. We have found that we could spend money on architectural fees and different things, and then you go tear open the walls and it's not what we all thought to begin with, and then you end up just paying to redo it again from a design perspective anyway. So, we did pretty aggressively come in and just start tearing it apart and say, we're going to go open this up, get to a shell, and then we'll figure out what it should be. We very much hit the ground running very hard, and in retrospect we may have overreacted, but we actually felt a little threatened by the city. I mean, they had literally said, don't buy this if you're not going to come in and start right away. And we actually started moving in the demo teams and the side dumps, and I think we demoed for a day or two before we found out that we actually didn't own the buildings, that the previous owners hadn't got the documents signed on time. I remember when we early on put on our new roofs that the chief building inspector actually told me, he said, well, I'm glad you got your roofs on, because if you fail, at least we know those buildings, will last a little longer now and be protected because of the new roofs, but really wasn't planning on us being successful because so many had failed prior to us. We gutted the buildings and we brought in new plumbing, new electric, updated all the electrical panels. We use a lot more power today than we had in the past, and so the services have to be upgraded, new copper lines and new waste lines out to the streets, connecting to the streets. The electric would be individual to each unit. We put in high efficiency heat pumps. We put washers and dryers in every single unit, which would be an amenity that would be required today. From an infrastructure perspective, we did everything we could to bring everything up to code, and any of those type of amenities that would be expected and be the norm in a new construction type environment, we wanted to make sure we had in the Midtown environment as well. By no means are we preservationists, and by no means are we trying to hit some historical bar. But, you know, we weren't completely, we tried to be respectful, I guess, of the process. We made some effort to try to keep the exteriors the same and to, you know, take them back. In the case of the Art Decos, I think somebody along the way had probably painted them blue and different things, and it turns out there was actually, those were originally built out of a sandstone type product, apparently pretty unique. I don't think they used it a lot. It did have some historic significance, so we actually tried to, you know, use the power washers to, you know, get the loose material off and get back to the original core material. Over the years, the mortar between the bricks tends to decay and, you know, fall away and so forth, and so we did retuck point the buildings. We did replace the windows. We did go back with some of the mission style grid patterns and so forth, trying to, you know, align to what may have been in there originally. We've stood back for over the last year since we've done that project. I mean, like I said, we were beat up and pretty bloody and bruised, so it's caused us to really question whether or not, you know, the overall urban rehab projects are worthwhile. And, you know, there were many moments when we thought we might be staring failure in the face, but, you know, we persevered and kept going. I mean, we're generally very proud of what we did there. I mean, like I said, you know, you always learn from the past and you can always do things better, but you know, we worked our tails off on that project, and a lot of blood and sweat went into that, and we think we did a good job.